Talks of a renewed Ukrainian counteroffensive have been going on for months, ever since the Ukrainian army steamrolled through northern Ukraine to liberate large swaths of territory near Kharkiv and in their stunning victory in the south against entrenched Russian positions near Kherson. Speculation has been abound for months when the renewed counteroffensive will take place. Due to various military and geopolitical factors, it'll probably happen before the end of this June, and here's why. Throughout the late winter and early spring, the US and NATO promised many modern weapon systems and ammunition. Chief among these most advanced systems include several hundred Leopard, Challenger, and M1 Abrams tanks. Ukraine has been asking for modern main battle tanks for months, since these Western tanks have much better survivability, accuracy, and stopping power than the legacy Soviet systems that form the core of Ukraine's armored units. In addition to these tanks, the West also promised a plethora of armored personnel carriers and fighting vehicles to reconstitute new Ukrainian armored brigades. By the end of April, 1,550 of these vehicles, including American Stryker and Bradley fighting vehicles, had been received by Ukrainian units or were about to be shipped from Poland. These new units are also head and shoulders above the outdated Soviet units like the BMP that they'd be facing out on the battlefield, and are expected to help form the tip of the spear in any renewed counteroffensive. Manning these machines are 9 newly formed Ukrainian armored brigades. 6 of these brigades were entirely trained by Western allies in their home countries before being sent back to Ukraine, while 3 of these were indigenously recruited and trained by Ukrainian forces. All told, these roughly 40,000 personnel armed with almost 2,000 new tanks and armored vehicles are going to be the main effort in the upcoming counteroffensive. Kyiv would be wise to use these resources soon, since they would not want to waste such training and material fighting pitched, fruitless battles in positional warfare. Indeed, these soldiers' training focused exclusively on combined arms tactics, meaning the coordination of infantry, armored, air, and artillery units in multi-pronged, multi-dimensional warfare. These troops are arguably some of the best trained and equipped in Ukraine, since they've spent months in relative safety receiving training, while their comrades have been holding the line in places like Bakhmut. With fresh, newly equipped units, these are likely to enter a major offensive soon, since each day they'd be in the line or even in the rear areas exposed to long-range fire from Russian forces. Their combat effectiveness would go down due to casualties and equipment losses. Another military aspect about why a counteroffensive in May or June makes sense is it'll occur at the end of the muddy season. Known locally as Rasputista, this Soviet-era holdover is the result of poor road planning. Unlike places like the US, which benefit from the interstate highway system, countries like Ukraine still suffer the effects of a lack of adequate roads that plague many countries of the former Soviet Union, including Russia itself. Due to poor construction, or no construction at all, most of the roads in Ukraine are still not paved. During the spring rainy season, these unpaved roads become impassable quagmires of mud that bog down even the strongest tanks and tracked vehicles, not to mention the trucks that supply them and the army moving forward in a counteroffensive. Because of this, the Ukrainian army is probably waiting for ground conditions to be favorable for the kind of lightning offensive they plan to launch. While some parts of Ukraine see the end of Rasputista at the end of April, other places see poor road conditions through mid-May. Wanting to keep all options on the table until the last minute, the Ukrainian Command Authority is likely waiting to ensure that all parts of Ukraine would favor armed warfare to keep the Russians guessing on where the strike could come from, but also strike before Russia uses favorable road conditions for its own offensive. But Ukraine is not just on a quick timeline because of its own military. It's also looking at developments with the Russian army that's likely pushing to launch a counteroffensive sooner rather than later. The first of these is the expected surge in manpower that comes with the spring conscription drive in Russia. Starting during the Soviet times, the Russian Federation has continued to annually draft young men into its military 2 times a year. The spring conscription drive lasts from April to July, and the autumn one from October to December. Normally around 150,000 to 200,000 Russian men are inducted into the army each time, and they're required to serve 12 months active duty. However, recent developments in Russian conscription laws, as well as Russian manpower projections, suggests Russia will send these troops to the front much sooner than before. At the end of April, Putin signed a decree that made it legal for Russian men to be served draft notices online. The portal is a common governmental website that everyday people use for a wide range of services, including paying utility bills, for example. The website will notify Russians they've been selected for the draft and have 1 week to report to a recruiting station. The significance of this for the Russian people and Ukraine is huge, since it means that there will no longer be roving patrols of army recruiters and police serving draft notices in person on the street, at work, or at vacation hotspots. Instead, the law forces men to come to the army, since those who fail to appear will not be able to get new apartments or jobs, have valid driver's license, travel, or even have access to loans or credit cards. These coercive measures will likely force more Russian citizens to recruiting offices than before and speed up the overall process. The manpower Russian military and police units would have used trying to enlist people will now be spent solely on hunting down those who evade the draft. Because Russian force generation efforts are improving and Russia's already shown a willingness to curtail the training of its draftees, this surge in manpower is likely to be sent to the front within a matter of weeks instead of months like it would have taken before. Even though these troops will likely still be poorly armed and even more poorly trained, quantity is a quality all in itself. This massive wave of fresh troops will likely waste limited Ukrainian resources or hold defensive positions to allow more seasoned troops to launch local counterattacks. Additionally, changes to Russian law and force generation projections means that if a successive wave of conscription ends, these troops will be there to stay for the long run. For example, the law that conscript soldiers cannot serve outside of the territory of Russia is still on the books, but Putin illegally annexing the occupied regions of Ukraine gives him the legal ground to send conscripts to Ukraine. Because this territory is now considered Russian territory under Russian law, these conscripts can now be legally sent to the front. Conscript service members are also usually forced to sign full-time enlistment contracts, and those who do cannot leave anyway because Putin never canceled the mobilization order from September 2022. Doing it like this is the only way the Russian army can grow by 400,000 new troops this year, the number offered by General Shoigu and endorsed by Putin, while simultaneously replacing losses and not instituting a general mobilization. Another reason why Ukraine seeks to achieve a decisive military victory before the hundreds of thousands of fresh troops arrive at the front is that each day that goes by is another day that the Russian defensive positions throughout Ukraine grow stronger. Immediately after the fall of Kherson, Russia began defensive preparations throughout Ukraine in earnest. Between Crimea and Kherson Oblast to southern Ukraine up to Luhansk Oblast in the north, Russia has been digging hundreds of miles of trenches and tank ditches interspersed with thousands of bunkers, dragon's teeth, and minefields. Satellite imagery has shown that these defensive fortifications are already extensive. U.S. officials have remarked that the defensive lines Russia has already constructed, combined with the terrain in southern Ukraine, would mean any future offensive would be very complex and require a ton of coordination. That means that each passing day Ukraine waits means another meter of trenches are dug, another bunker built, or a minefield laid that will only serve to complicate offensive efforts when the time comes. And the Ukrainian army does not have unlimited time to fix Russians to their positions in a war of attrition. As brave, courageous, and superhuman as the individual Ukrainian soldier has demonstrated themselves to be, they are not infallible to mental and physical exhaustion. Reports from the front lines continue to show a common trend that Ukrainian units are simply exhausted from months of hard fighting. During pitched defensive battles, an army will continually rotate units from the front lines to rear areas after several weeks of fighting for a rest and then back to the line, such as the case in World War I. But Ukraine has not had this luxury. Most units have been at the front lines for months, and some have not left combat since the war started. The soldiers in these units have not had a break, sometimes in over a year, and there are already signs that mental and physical fatigue plague large portions of the military. Ukraine has done its best to address these problems by embedding psychologists and counselors inside frontline units to treat the soldiers where they are, because the Ukrainian government cannot afford to send anyone home. While these measures have certainly helped, without a major victory where Russian troops are really on their back foot, Ukrainian units will continue to stay in place and train reinforcements at the front lines, with few opportunities to go to rear areas for rest. Fatigue will also play a huge factor in the battle for Bakhmut, and what would happen if Ukraine lost this area. Recent reports show that the battle for Bakhmut is far from over, but it looks bleaker than in previous months. Ukrainian forces doggedly resist dozens of attacks daily in the city and the surrounding countryside. However, this constant high-intensity fighting takes a mental and physical toll on those brave defenders. While the battle's outcome still hangs in the air, Ukraine is not in a good spot. Estimates vary, but Russia controls probably about half the city, and it has it surrounded on three sides. The last remaining supply line into the city, known as the Road of Life by Ukrainian troops, is under constant attack. However, despite these difficulties, Ukraine will likely continue to hold on for weeks or maybe months to come. But Ukrainian commanders cannot discount the very real possibility that Bakhmut might fall. This would have very strong strategic implications despite the area being of no military significance. Bakhmut can be likened to Germany's Battle of Verdun, a carefully calculated war of attrition meant for no other military purpose than to inflict maximum casualties. Ukraine has decided to give Russia what it wants by defending Bakhmut to the last man and fixing the Russians in place. Because of the dogged Ukrainian defense, the city has turned into a political symbol, as Stalingrad did in World War II, where Ukraine continues to bait Russia into focusing more attention on the city by continuing to hold it. Because Bakhmut holds so much political capital, the Russian military is sinking more and more resources into Bakhmut and neglecting other areas of the front. Because the Ukrainian military is fixing the Russians in place, they are carefully sending in just enough troops and material to hold on while offensive preparations begin elsewhere. Since Russian focus is so fixated on Bakhmut, a counteroffensive that occurs while Russia still attempts to achieve this political victory will have much more success than if the Russians were not concentrated in the Bakhmut direction. If Ukraine launched a counteroffensive after Bakhmut falls, if it does at all, this would complicate matters significantly, since it's likely that the Russian commanders would redeploy the troops and equipment to other areas of the front. But while Bakhmut remains in Ukrainian hands, President Zelensky knows where the Russians are and can focus his counteroffensive on other neglected areas because of Russia's all-or-nothing gamble on Bakhmut. Beyond the military advantages of launching a counteroffensive soon, President Zelensky and his staff must consider a host of geopolitical factors. One of these is the expected mass deportations of Ukrainian citizens from Russian-occupied territory. Since the invasion, Russian DPR and LPR authorities have received several million Ukrainian civilians. While Russia claims these are all voluntary migrations, evidence on the ground encapsulated in reports from Human Rights Watch tells a different story. Ukrainian civilians under Russian occupation face a host of abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, theft of property or loss of employment, and other crimes too graphic to list here. These forced deportations have been thoroughly documented and will now continue in earnest with a new law Putin just signed at the end of April. The law says that by the summer of 2024, if Ukrainian civilians do not adopt Russian citizenship, they will be deported to Russia as foreign agents. Because of this, millions of Ukrainians might be lost forever, either in Russian prisons, concentration camps, or outright murder, if the military does not liberate those territories soon. If that were to happen, it would be a huge psychological and political blow to both the people and the military. Another reason why a counteroffensive will happen soon, but has yet to happen already, has to do with the leaked documents from April. While the documents were only a snapshot in time, they provided detailed and accurate Ukrainian troop positions for those dates. Those documents, though only for single-day periods, when consolidated with other intelligence Russia might gather on Ukraine, might give them an accurate picture of how Ukraine deploys and distributes its forces. U.S. military officials already stated the document leak caused Ukraine to rethink its counteroffensive plans. Why this happened is because Russia gained valuable insight into how Ukraine has been distributing its forces, and the Ukrainian military needed more time to figure out a way to move its units around, so the intelligence is of little value. This is because, as mentioned earlier in the video, Ukrainian units often spend months locked into positions due to the needs of the conflict, necessitating the training of replacements close to the front lines and their inability to leave their current positions. If the document leaks had not occurred, the counteroffensive might have already taken place. However, because of it, the Ukrainian plans have been delayed by some time, but will not be delayed too much longer, so that Ukraine can still hold the strategic initiative in any future offensive operations. Another reason why Ukraine will have to launch a counteroffensive soon to maintain the strategic initiative is to prevent Russia from accumulating enough arms and supplies capable of staving off any future attack. This is because of the increasing support Russia is getting from countries like Iran, North Korea, and China. Over the past 6 months, Iran and North Korea have been providing massive military assistance to Russia with direct lethal aid. For example, Russian doctrine calls for massive, continuous artillery strikes to blast enemy positions into oblivion. This constant, around-the-clock artillery fire eats up a huge number of artillery shells. On average, Russia fires about 20,000 per day, but during periods of intense fighting, these figures have gone up to around 50,000, and some estimates have said up to 80,000 shells of various calibers per day. With such a massive requirement for ammunition, both Iran and North Korea have sent millions of artillery shells between the two to supply Russian guns. In addition, Iran has sent thousands of drones and has inked a deal to provide long-range ballistic missiles, but these are not believed to have been delivered yet. While China has continued to say it'll not supply either side in the conflict, the leaked papers from several weeks ago suggest that China has already signed a deal with Russia to provide lethal aid that is either dual use or disguised as civilian goods. This claim seems to be very accurate, since recent reporting has proven China has already sent about 1,000 assault rifles labeled as hunting rifles, along with body armor and drone parts. China, of course, denies it's done this, but will continue to likely send dual-use goods like computers, electronics, and drones that have legitimate civilian purposes, but that Russia will immediately repurpose for military use. With China now backing Russia in this war, the Ukrainian Command Authority knows it only is a matter of time before even more arms and supplies arrive daily from Iran, North Korea, and China. These shipments will help shore up Russia's crippled defense industrial base by providing crucial items like artillery shells, drones, and missiles to allow Russia to continue blasting Ukraine with long-range fire. A counteroffensive is needed soon, before Russia receives enough aid to give it an advantage in the war. But Ukraine is focusing on more than just the aid Russia receives. It's also worrying about the integrity of its own aid the country receives from the West. Ever since the beginning of the war, media reports have claimed that the U.S. has held private talks with President Zelensky and his staff, and that the U.S. and Western aid is not indefinite. At some point, the literal fire hose of money and support will stop, and if the war continues for years, Ukraine will have to make do with what it has left. Adding proof that Western aid as it stands right now is not infinite is that the US and NATO allies have had great difficulty sourcing aid with the size of their current defense industries. While weapons like the Javelin, NLAW, Stinger, and anti-air systems have dominated the media, even less glamorous items like spare tank parts for legacy Soviet vehicles have been a problem to source for Ukraine. Because Ukraine still relies heavily on Soviet systems, the Western alliance has been struggling to get European countries that still possess these weapons to donate them to Ukraine in exchange for newer systems. While countries like the US, UK, and France might be able to support smaller NATO countries in fully equipping their militaries with modern equipment, the time it would take to fully equip and train the Ukrainian military while still actively engaged in combat is going to take a lot longer. As a result, the stocks of older Soviet weapons and ammunition dry up among NATO countries, and Ukraine will have to be fully converted to modern Western equipment. Such a move will be slow-going, unless Western countries dramatically increase defense spending on their domestic arms industries, which is a gamble that might not pay off for Ukraine if the war lasts for years. But the war may not be able to be politically supported long enough for Western defense manufacturers to fully meet the demand of arming and equipping Ukraine with new equipment. The speculation has been publicly backed up by countries like France and Germany, who, though they might support Ukraine, have also expressed interest in their desire to see a diplomatic solution to the fighting. President Zelensky, for his part, at the beginning of the conflict, expressed a willingness to maybe negotiate. But now, with his military having an advantage over Russia, he's repeatedly claimed the war will not be over until every last inch of Ukraine territory is liberated, Crimea included. But of course, the weapons, material, and money needed to finance such a campaign is going to be enormous, and U.S. military officials have even cast doubt as to whether this goal is even realistic. But it's not just the U.S. military that has cast doubt on Ukraine's ability to regain its territory. Anti-Ukrainian sentiment among EU and American politicians and the public is growing. As of the making of this video, about half the American public supports continued aid to Ukraine, about a quarter do not, and about a quarter are indifferent. This is less than European support, where about 70% want aid to continue to Ukraine. Among U.S. politicians, there is a small minority who are vehemently opposed to even a single penny more for Ukraine. While the number of politicians who feel this way is not more than several dozen, the fact that this exists at all is alarming to pro-Ukrainian supporters. President Zelensky knows that even if he still has overwhelming support for his cause, a long, protracted war will mean less and less aid will flow in the future. But even if the aid continues to come to his country, the growing anti-Ukraine minorities will do everything in their power to delay and obfuscate the process enough that his forces might be gapped critical weapons and supplies when they need them most. So because of this, Ukraine must launch an epic all-in counteroffensive soon to prove to their Western supporters that Ukraine can and will win this war militarily and do not have some kind of forever war with Russia. Now go check out France's World War III plan or click this other video instead.